we're doing Philip II of Macedonia. Voila! So what we're going to do, we're going to have a bit of an angle because of Chris. But it's better than me blaming Lynn. Right, excellent.
It's a real improvement, isn't it?
Yeah, wow.
You can't see a thing now.
It's not much of an improvement, is it?
No. Might be better on the door.
Yeah, well, we were going to put it on the... Oh, right, forget it. Right, forget it. We'll just go back to the old thing. Right, okay, here we go. It didn't work. Why is it not bloody working? Come on. Right, okay. Move that. There, go. There, bingo. We're there. Excellent. Right, now we can celebrate. We are doing Philip of Macedon. There we are. Okay. It's all working technology. Right, so what do we know about Philip of Macedon, everybody? Gillian? Nothing. Philip of Macedon.
He was a Greek.
Yes, he was. No,
No,
he
he
wasn't.
wasn't.
He was
He
a
was
Macedonian.
Macedonian.
Exactly. See? Nearly called me out there.
In disguise.
Actually, if we want to geographically get this correct, he was a southern Macedonian because northern Macedonia is where modern Macedonia is today. Don't ask. I've got a map coming up. Oh, come on. Anyone else know anything about Philip II?
Was he the father of Alexander?
Yes, he was the father of Alexander the Great. Yes.
Great
Anything
general,
else?
Great general.
Great general, yes. It's likely that if Philip II hadn't been assassinated, not much would have changed in the world at all. But we'll go on to that. One thing that we do know about the excavations where the tomb of Philip the Macedon was originally found is that within that landscape there are hundreds and hundreds of other burials. And one name that does crop up in all the reading material is this guy known as Manolis Andronicus. I've mentioned Andronicus a number of times. Andronicus is the archaeologist that peered into the tomb and suddenly that vase on the table, the flowers wilted and turned to dust. But you know what? After I heard him say that, I haven't actually been able to see that in writing since. But one thing that we do need to look at is this very fact here that says in antiquity the Gauls had plundered most of the tombs at Vergina, but the Gauls had left practically intact the great tomb, the biggest tomb of biggest tomb of them all. The Gauls decided to leave, which is quite strange. And within that tomb, indeed, was the tomb of Philip II himself. It's quite strange that. I don't think there's any irony in it at all. That great tomb itself, like great tombs, like we see the great tomb of Qixinghang, the first dynasty in China, that hasn't been opened yet. This hadn't been opened, but it was opened in 1977 by the wonderful archaeologist Andronicus, who discovered a royal tomb. One of two discovered in that large mound. There were in fact originally 4 tombs. 2 had been looted and the other 2 hadn't. And the chest, the golden coffer, the golden chest that was found with the not so badly cremated remains of Philip, because basically his whole mandible was intact with the teeth, other than 4 incisors, other than 2 incisors and so on. It was relatively intact. And on that golden coffer, that golden box itself, was the radiating star of Macedonia, which is now used on the Macedonian flag today. The northern Macedonian state today, which is now called Macedonia, I know you're getting confused, they use that symbol on their flag since its discovery of that symbol in 1977. And one thing that people do think is that the northern Macedonians and the southern Macedonians want to be married in a great intercourse, splitting modern day Greece into 2. But that there's no real talk of that yet. And when we talk about this coffer where a man's ashes and bones are to be found, the room was richly furnished with paraphernalia of a noble warrior, a gold scepter, picture of Lloyd George, carefully wrought armour, including a pair of greaves, a gold quiver, and so on and so on. And a smaller coffer also decorated with a Macedonian star.
What's a pair of greaves?
Leg shields.
Oh.
Leg shields. Leg shields. I know you want to say something, Jim.
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know.
If I wait long enough, you'll shut up. That's great. It's brilliant.
That's true.
Do you know what? I'm going to learn that trick from now on, right? If Ellen's got her hand up for 4 hours, she'll eventually forget the question. Right. Anyway, so this paints this nice little sort of genuine, tender picture of what's in the tomb. But one amazing thing that we can say about Philip II is he's one of very few great leaders in history whose tomb has ever been found. Don't even mention Richard III, right, which we're doing next week. Richard III was not a great leader. He was a tiny little footnote in British history. But obviously they found his body. Even the likes of Joan of Arc. She was a major figure in history, but we haven't found her remains. But we do have the remains of the last emperor of China, Qi Shi Huang. But we think they're in the mound. But other than that, there are very few great leaders in history that we actually know where the remains are. Tutankhamun, he was a very insignificant minor king who, if his tomb hadn't have been found, would probably never be mentioned in history again. But this was a great leader. This was somebody whose footnote in history was bigger than anyone else's footnote in history. And to be honest with you, his enduring legacy was far more enduring than Alexander the Great's legacy could have ever been. Alexander the Great's empire lasted less than 10 years after his death, and then the whole thing fell apart. And to be honest with you, what Alexander the Great started off before his great conquest of Asia Minor after 336 BC, after the death of Philip II, all that retracted back into the territory that Philip II had created in the first place. The reason why this individual is so important in history, the landmass of Greece, as it stands today, and most of the islands, Rhodes, Lesbos, and all the rest of it, were those territories that had been conquered by Philip II. After that, most of what you see of modern-day Greece, there's not much been added to it. And this is after over 2,000 years. So when we say great figures in history, truly is a great figure in history, because his legacy has been enduring. So, if we actually move on, Lynn, that's good. Thanks, Lynn. So what we've got here, we've got the diadem crown above. Basically, if you want to get an idea of scale, it's 2 lengths of 2 shoe boxes, but it's solid gold. And there's golden rivets on it as well. Golf. This itself was one of the several crowns of Philip II. A wonderful ornate gold crown with wonderful vine leaves and flowers and all those wonderful things that you think of in the past. This is not a gold casket covered on wood, or the other way around. It's not a wooden casket with gold plate or leaf or whatever on the outside. This is a standalone golden object. This stands up by itself. This is how it's meant to be. This is always how it was meant to be. So that's a big difference with this artifact. The greatness of the gold that is associated with the Philip II tells us not so much of the greatness of the individual, but tells us that of the great respect and love that people had for this leader. Pausanias, who actually killed Philip II, was actually a member of his bodyguard. You know, Philip II was an individual who just would wander through the streets with all the people around him, knowing that nobody's going to tackle him. But it took somebody from within to kill him. And we don't really know why Pausanias actually killed Philip II. But there was great retribution upon his supporters, and it's likely that his great supporters were those in fact from Persia. And the great retribution was wrought on the land of the Persians by his son Alexander the Great. And we know what happened to the Persians then. They were completely defeated, not only in battle, but in their morality and sense of ownership. So what we could do is look at this coin here. And this coin here is very similar to a coin that I keep with me 24/7. I've actually got a silver to drachma with me today in my bag. It's from Ptolemy V of ancient Egypt. It's worth close on £1,000. And I keep that coin with me because there's nowhere else is safer to put it. So I will get it out just before the break so Gillian can see it. This coin itself is roughly the size of a £2 coin. It's the thickness of a £1 coin. And it's solid 100% silver. This is the most finest silver that you can see the embodiment made into coins. What was a coin back then? Could you take a coin into the local Lidl's and spend it? The answer is no. And the reason why the answer is no is because coins were not widely circulated then amongst the poor people. So if you went into the corner shop with a silver coin like this, you could probably buy the corner shop and probably quite a large number of loaves of bread. So it was not a feasible form of currency. What this currency was the status, was the status mark. Look, I am a leader, I am a great person. And this is what we see portrayed on the coins. Silver to drachma dated back to the reign of Philip II. So the date that we can look at this, roughly about 350 years BC, where we were still living in our mud huts, clubbing women, wandering down the streets, and we had no coins at all. Our first introduction of coins in Britain was roughly between 150 years BC. So it would take a time before we actually had our coins being introduced. And they were just for status. Nobody went out back then and used any of these coins for any lighter forms of trade. They were for the upper echelons of trade. Let's buy an acre of land. Let's have a few tetradrachma. And then we've got the gold versions of these coins as well. Absolutely beautiful and exquisite. It says on the obverse is the head of Zeus with a lauret crown on it. Well, you could actually say this is the embodiment of Philip II. This isn't Zeus. This is Philip II himself. Before you mention the arrow in his eye, we'll come on to that in a short while. But this could be maybe what the wonderful Philip II actually looked like, rather than Zeus himself. Because in other words, Philip II really became a respected lower deity in his own right after his death. He was so well respected and so loved. A bit like our present Queen Elizabeth II. I know everyone in the room loves Queen Elizabeth II. Alan goes every year to a birthday party. On the reverse, a youth on horseback advances right, holding palm, frond and reins, the legend. We haven't actually got the legend. What the legend is there? Oh, damn it. Oh, yes, we got the legend reads...
It's Philip Hoy, whatever the oi means.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm glad we got somebody who knows it. That is really impressive, isn't it?
It's helped a lot.
That has helped a lot. But this is really important. The very strident horse. This is meant. If we look at this, would be an embodiment of Philip. This is actually Philip himself as well. Philip was known to enter the Olympic Games, and every time, as these leaders did back in history, they always won the Olympic Games. Many years later, Nero, and every single competition, Nero entered at the Olympic Games. I think roughly about 56 AD. He won, except there was nobody else. He won the chariot race because he was the only one who entered. He ran the 100 metres. He won that as well. He won the javelin and the discus. But he was the only one who entered the competitions. But he had all the gold medals. It's great, isn't it? Nero was the most... he was the most one with the most accolades in Olympic history because he won everything. Unlike the Russians who win everything today. But anyway, so you can get an idea of these coins. This This is coins. These are coins themselves. And the one thing about these coins is what we do see is that throughout history, these are copied. So by the time these get over to Britain, the Britons think, oh wow, there's a nice design of a horse on that one. Maybe we can copy that one. And that's a nice design of someone. Right? He looks a bit like Togodumnus. So we'll put him on the coin as well. Our coins were just copies. They weren't that hot. Okay? But these coins were the origins of these coins. The first sort of the first types of coins were being issued in Asia Minor, that type of landscape, into the landscape of Macedonia, over into Persia, and slowly over into the likes of China and all the rest of it. Everyone's starting to have coins. We were some of the last to have coins, other than the fact that the whole of the subcontinent of North and South America and they didn't have coins either. But other than that, you know what I'm talking about. So if we actually go on a little bit further, look at that wonderful design there. Now, one thing is very difficult to get the research on this, right? One thing is very difficult to get the research on this is actually I had to look and look again. Some scholarly stuff. Nobody actually said that actually in this box was actually the cremated remains of Philip. It said there was the remains of Philip, and I was trying to top this up against the humerus and the femur, and trying to put everything in here. And I thought it's not exactly going to fit. I can't see a femur in there, and I can't see any of those. Basically, what they did it was a partial burnt body, and the whole of the lower mandible was intact. So this is how we were able to identify this was Philip. Part of his skull as well was intact, so we could tell from the skull in here. Not only was a male by the jaw and all the rest of it, but we could also see from the teeth he had a good diet. Carry on. We could also see from the socket of his right eye as well that there was some damage in there, and there was some marks on the bone as well. All descriptions in antiquity of Philip II having these wounds in battle. And interesting enough, Philip II survived from an arrow, which went directly into his eye. As most of us know, Harold of Hastings didn't die with an arrow going through his eye. He was cut down by an axe. But just because you've got an arrow going through your eye doesn't necessarily mean it's going to kill you, does it? Look at Keith. He survived quite well. The one thing as well is that we've not only got this golden chest, we've got these silver petaled flowers on it as well. And these wonderful silver petal flowers on it, and these golden rivets. Don't get too excited, Goth. You finally found out where the golden rivets are on the ship. There they are. So again, this Macedonian star, and exactly that bit by bit is replicated on the Macedonian flag. There's no changes. There's no reversals.
With the Macedonian star, could they have witnessed a supernova at that period of time and regarded that as a symbol or something?
Not really sure about that, because it's going to be very difficult to pitch that in history. Yeah, I was wandering out the front door this morning, and my stepdaughter was saying, it's the big one, the coronavirus, which I'm actually really particularly interested in the way it's developing. But anyway, that's my sick mind. My stepdaughter said, wicked. Every 20th year of a century, there's this great outbreak. And I said, no, there's not. The Spanish flu was in 1918, 1919. Yeah, but it's close. And the thing is, you could say that the star's linked to a supernova, right? But it could be linked to equally anything else. So it's trying to make that link. And let's just see this star representation of the birth of the gods within that landscape, that we see the Macedonians and the ancient Greeks and the Thracians and the Spartans, and that entire wonderful landscape. One thing that we can say about Philip II is that in later portrayals, even though the historians tell us that he had these wounds on his face and he looked a little bit despicable, you don't actually see busts of him showing those wounds. Gods don't have those wounds. So if you see the embodiment of Philip II as some kind of deity, he's not going to have those wounds because he doesn't need it. Because when you go into heaven, or Mount Olympus, I should say, those wounds are repaired. So are we looking into the face of Philip II, or are we looking into the face of somebody with a perm beard some permed hair and so on. But again, this is a figure that's so respected. He goes beyond those barriers because he was seen to be a regal diplomat as well. He was seen to be a learned politician as well as a warmonger. Qi Xu, when we look at the art of war in ancient China, is the use of metaphors to war that take us in a direction to peace. And in a way, Philip II has that sense. He says to the ancient Greeks, for example, he says, right, I can either capture your city and enslave you all, or you can surrender and you can be part of my world. Okay, so they're given a choice. A bit of that sense of diplomacy. And he wasn't a leader in his reign that allowed the conquest to go to his head. You could say that his son Alexander the Great's conquest went to his head over his 13-year reign. I think it probably did. Alexander the Great wanted to keep going and going and going. Philip II thought, right, we'll take this territory, we'll make sure it's secure, we'll make sure the politics are okay, we'll make sure they're on our sides. Sides, because we're looking at groups of people working together. This is the way he did his work. And maybe some of his generals didn't like this. Maybe his generals wanted to go further. Let's kick ass. Let's go towards the Persians. Let's do more. And some say Pausanias was instructed by one of Philip II's generals to assassinate him. Because actually all the generals wanted him to go further. But this was a man who knew his politics. This was not the Boris Johnson of his day. This was a politician who really knew the direction they wanted to go into and set and kept with it, with no changes. Sorry to add the politics in there. I mentioned Jeremy Corbyn. I love him to bits. Right, anyway. So what are we looking at? What are we looking at here? We're looking at, by the time we get to 336, okay, what we've got in 336 is that all of this territory here, with the influence of Crete and Sparta, is under the controls of the Greeks. And actually, I didn't do this, but the only difference between this map today and ancient Greece is a little bit up here, a little bit over here, a little bit up here, and that is what Greece looks like today. How many empires on the planet can you say have kept their more or less borders for over 2,000 years? Very few. Britain, for example, is a very new country in the terms of politics. This is a country that survived within those borders. If we want to look a little bit more at this, so if I can just go to my little map on here. Thank you, Lynn. Me and Lynn are attuned these days. I think, Lynn, let's just get to it. Good, we got to it. Let's look a little bit at this map. So what we're talking about is here, Aegina. This is where the capital city is, and this is the landmass at 356. This is when the likes of Philip II is starting to get his power. This sort of area, this area of Macedonia, this is when he's now becoming a really greatly respected leader. 356. So you can imagine, you can work out the maths here, for 20 years, this is somebody building his territory. And then what we have, we got the likes of Thessaly over here, which is next controlled by the Macedonians. And then what he then decides to do is have a two-pronged campaign, the east and the west of the Second World War front. So he conquers this territory over here, which is Molosia, and this large area called Thrace. Now you could think they could stop there. But those people who called themselves allies were being a right pain in the buttocks. The Greeks. Not those Greeks, those Athenians. Get my facts straight there. There are Greeks and there are Athenians. So these damnable Athenians are causing him a bit of a thorn in his side. And he gives that ultimatum. But by around 338 BC, 2 years before his assassination, there's a great victory against the Greeks. the Corinthians, the Olympians, the Athenians, the Thermonians, all these people gathered together against the likes of Philip, and they're all defeated. So this was a great victory. And with it comes the islands of Lesbos, Rhodes, and now Sparta and Crete are basically under the influence of Philip II. Would he have gone further? Would he have defeated the Persians? Would he have gone all the way to Baghdad? Would he have gone all the way to the Hindu Kush? Would he have gone all the way to the foothills of India? Would he have done all that? The answer is probably no. He knew his people. Alexander the Great knew himself. Alexander the Great was a very selfish man, I believe. Because selfishness doesn't last long. And you see the selfishness with the collapse of his empire eventually. But this has been almost retained. Some historians say that he would have gone over and defeated the Persians and said, right, that's it. We'll establish colonies down here in Ephesus, which the likes of Alexander the Great did do. And we'll call it a day. That's all we need to do. And to be honest with you, whether he had survived or and Alexander the Great hadn't done what he did, we'd have still had the rise of Rome. Everything in history would have more or less remained the same, except that Philip II would have been the great conqueror and not Alexander the Great. Do you know what? I buy a new leaf, right, to give me a nice bit of bloody colour, right, and it don't happen. Lynn, make sure you put that concoction together for next week, okay, so we make sure it works properly, right? Good. A bit of herbs, I think, a bit of clove, that'll be fine. Put a bit of lime in there as well, it'll be brilliant. That's good. So this is what our Philip II looked like. Okay. There he is. Oh. Stop it, Chris. Right, so here we go. His right eye is said to have had an arrow from a battle go through his right eye, and he had to have his eye taken out surgically, which would have been, I'm sure, very, very painful. And then we've got a sword wound there as well. So he's gone back into battle, and he had this other injury. Now, there's very little written about this guy's sort of physical appearance. You know, nobody says, oh, he was an absolutely ugly brute. You don't want to go near him. He was a well-respected brute, which is rather different. And he was. People didn't see it as a disability. They saw it. This is our king. This is our diplomat. This is our great leader. And this is what we're seeing. And we shouldn't be taken away by anything of the look. The diadem crown itself, the very soft gold one that he's wearing, as opposed to the other one that we've actually seen. He obviously had different crowns for different purposes and different meetings. You know, it's said he dangerously would meet Greek diplomats without any bodyguard and protection. Again, the irony is he was killed by one of his own. That is a good point that I wish to make earlier on, actually. Many of the great people in history, many of the great empires in history, collapse not from without, but collapse from within. When you look at the history of the Roman world, in particular, Rome is always captured by those who are on the inside. Or Dacre, who's the last individual to actually capture Rome, was actually a general who fought for Rome, but thought, oh, I've had enough of these idiots. I'll just walk through the gates of Rome and say Rome's mine, and then the Roman Empire collapsed and Rome became a kingdom. This is the thing. Lots of things in history are not from without; they're from within, where we see these things. For example, First World War. Germany couldn't go any further. Germany couldn't go on in the First World War because they were having internal risings, internal riots. They could have continued in the First World War, but their allies were collapsed, and it was within that destroyed Germany in the First World War. And the same parallel could be made with any other people in history and empires. We'll forget about the Second World War. There he is again. Isn't that a bloke you've met on the internet, Lynn?
Yeah.
So you can see here the facial reconstruction. I think it was about 20 years ago. They got the press cut in somewhere. If somebody could come to my studio in Barry and sort out the 10,000 press cuttings that we got. But no, nobody seems to want to do that. But anyway, about 20 years ago, there was headline news. We finally reveal what Philip II actually looked like. And people are saying, right, okay, you've got the bones in the chest, in the golden box. How can you do that? And a new technique was building. What would happen? You try and reconstruct the skull to your best ability. And then what you would do along your skull as it's being reconstructed, you would take a cast from it, and then you would measure at the points where the muscle would be, and then that would have a certain thickness, and then you would have a certain thickness of the skin, and they developed this, and they felt, right, that's how Philip II looked. What was his hair colour like? Well, it is based on other descriptions, and it's also, we would now also base it on the DNA, that he had this dark hair. And you could probably get an idea from the DNA today, not when this was done, by the way. It's pretty good reconstruction, actually, from 20 odd years ago. Today we can actually work out more or less what his skin colour was like as well. So we can work out that they look very similar to this. And to be honest with you, he's not a bad looking bloke, really, is he, Lynn? I wouldn't chuck him out of bed. So he's not a bad looking bloke. And to be honest with you, he's quite a prompt, quite a firm looking leader. He hasn't got these deep set eye sockets like I've got, for example. He's more of a flusher face, more of a face that you can actually talk to. And this is his facial reconstruction from the remains that we found. There was a long debate over the fact that this can't be Philip II. It just can't be. It's just like too lucky. But they've tested it over and over again. The wonderful thing with Philip II is that when Andronicus said this is Philip II, the Greek government said, yeah, that's great, but we need to test it. And they tested it. From all the evidence they had, it's Philip II. A few years later, they tested it again, Philip II. A few years later, it definitely can't be Philip II, it's Philip II. Tested it in 2015, guess what? It can't be Philip II. They tested it with more techniques, it's Philip II. I love this type of archaeologist continually reinforcing who this individual is. The Greeks ain't scared of this. They want to have the science out there. You can think, for example, the Turin Shroud, the Vatican. Some elements of the Vatican still believe that this is an image of Christ in the Turin Shroud, and they won't have it tested, right? But properly tested, because some people have managed to get a sample off and tested it from the 1300s, but that's another thing altogether. So with this is a really good sense of history. We know, and again, we might be able to understand what Joan of Arc looked like if we had some remains of her bones, for example. Again, that's another facial bust from about 100 years AD, a Roman period bust. This guy is so well respected. Now, isn't it great when I do these classes that you hear about these classes after I've done it? This is the third time I've done this one now. And when we're doing this, I've got my Rhonda class saying, you know when you get to that mob on Thursday, say, yeah, why did you put this in there? Why didn't you tell them this? And I'm thinking, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, that's a good idea. And we get to Tuesday. Sandra, who's in my Skype class, she said, oh, actually, known Sandra for years. She said, actually, I've been here. Okay, wonderful. It's better than the descriptions that you're giving us. It's a beautiful plain with all these mounds on it. Yeah, 500 mounds. Some have been excavated. It's more or less next door to the main road. Can't really see that there. It's very visible. There's a museum on site, and it's more or less within the foothills of these mountainous regions around. Obviously to the north you've got Yugoslavia and you've got sort of the mountainous Balkans. But it's sort of within that area. You can understand why there's a great city there. And she said she went down these very steps, but she couldn't get in when she visited the site because they were still excavating the site. And lo and behold, they're still excavating the site today of Vagina Agina. A-I-G-A-I or Vagina, V-E-R-G-I-N-I-A. This site itself has 4 separate entrances into it. Two turned out to be robbed, the tombs were in, and the other 2 hadn't. And it starts to make you think maybe the goals. One thing in history I'm finding so much more is that what you do see in history is that those barbarians are always painted as barbarians. You know, the first sacking of Rome in 410 was a moment when we see descriptions of the whole city set alight and everything's burnt and destroyed. The answer is no, it isn't. It isn't. Only bits of the city are destroyed, not all of it. Big chunks of it are still standing. And not all of the statues are destroyed. Not all of it is looted and pillaged and all the rest of it. And it's the same with Vagina. There's some sense of respect for the landscape. The Gauls, in a way, respect these mounds. And why do they respect these mounds? Because they're similar to their mounds back in their homeland. Hundreds and hundreds of miles further towards the northwest. So you can think, right, we know what these are. The great one should be left, and they left it. Because I'm sure if I was sacking the city, right, the place to go to would be the big mound, surely to God. And it wasn't. It likely that the 2 other ones that were sacked may have been sacked before the Gauls. You know, the tomb, the main thing is the tomb of Philip II was completely intact. It was so intact because of the vacuum. Now this is a very interesting one. How do you create a vacuum in an ancient tomb? You can work out the ones in ancient Egypt. That's easy, right? They're in rock-cut sandstone, several meters below the surface. You seal it all up with clay. You seal it up with clay. You put another wall there. You seal it up with clay. All the gaps are filled. That's how you create a vacuum, right? How do you create a vacuum further up north where it's slightly damp and all the rest of it? Well, it was well sealed up. And one thing that we do believe is lots of the lamps inside were kept burning away the oxygen, creating the vacuum in itself, and the plants inside as well, trying to absorb that oxygen at the point that there's no more there. And this is how we see the vacuum being created in this tomb of Philip II. And why do we feel there's a vacuum there? I went with Andronicus' own description. And as he peers in through this door, as it's opened, he the usual thing, he calls in, there's a camera. I've actually seen the original black and white film footage. And in the distance, weirdly enough, 1977, there's black and white film footage. And you can actually see there's a flower in the distance. And you squint your eye and it's gone. You can see it. I've seen the footage. I've seen it, right? And I know his description. Can't find his description anywhere, but I know it. I've seen that footage. And that's because of the vacuum in there. It's holding everything up. The lack of oxygen and everything. And the tightness of the air is holding everything up. The oxygen enters and everything goes to dust. So somebody else asked me on Tuesday, they said, hang on a minute. When you looked at Mycenae, with the excavations of Heinrich Schliemann in the 1870s, 1870 I think it was precisely, when Heinrich Schliemann was excavated in Mycenae, which is not so far south from Aegina itself, he said they lifted up the golden mask of Agamemnon, and underneath you could actually see into the actual eyeballs, and actually you could look at the skin of Agamemnon himself. And no sooner had he turned away and he looked back, the skin had all turned to dust. Right? Could that be possible? Or if it was so anaerobic, if the oxygen was, could that be possible? Maybe it could be. because what we do see, for example, in the United States, when in the United States there was this fashion for sealing people up in coffins, really airtight coffins, and you open them and the person looks very similar to when you put them in the ground in the 1950s and 1960s. So if that can happen, I know it's closer in time, I know that we can really get a grip on what the tomb of Philip II really, really looked like. Get away from the goriness. So what we've got, we've got two entrances. We've got this entrance, and we've got another one coming up as well. And beyond that is another entrance. So you've got, beyond this, you've got an antechamber, and then beyond that, you've got a chamber, right? The main chamber itself. So there's two doors to go into there, so you can get an idea of how sort of air-packed this is. And it doesn't look very air-packed from what you're looking at, but it definitely was. It was beautifully painted, probably cobalt blue paint here being used. This had been beautifully stucco, beautifully rendered before they put the painting on it as well. And you can imagine Andronicus is looking and thinking, beyond that door, who is it? And actually, one thing I've missed completely from the other lectures I've done this week is that when Andronicus was excavating here, he actually believed that this was the tomb, not of Philip II, but of Alexander the Great himself. This is the place where Alexander the Great should be buried, alongside his father, alongside his son, alongside the rest of his family. Alexander the Great's tomb has never been found. But Andronicus was not disappointed, because what he found was this major footnote in history, this very important person, Philip II. And this is what we're looking at. So a nice little bit of a plan. I managed to trace this one down. So you've got the front porch, as you can put it. Let's put that as a porch. You've got the doorway, and then you go into the antechamber, and then what you have here is another door, and you've got the chamber beyond. You've got these two separate boxes. You've got the minor box I've described, and you've got the other box with the remains of Philip II actually in it. And there's flowers, there's vases, there's little tables, there's all those different things. There's his armour, we'll have a little look at that. We've got some food offerings, we've got some lamps, we've got all the usual paraphernalia. But it's completely sealed and airtight. We can see where they're building this. They're building these wonderful internal tombs, 4 in this great mound. And they're sealing them up, and then they're backfilling with loads of earth. Do you know what? I saw this really silly theory in a magazine the other day. Apparently, the pyramids were built from the top downwards. It showed that there was this huge wooden frame, and they built the top bit, right, and they built it downwards, right? But that is fiction. This is fact. This was these 4 tombs were built, and then the earth placed around them. And obviously, this was a fitting place for Philip II himself. And he was left alone. He was left to rest. He wasn't buried with any concubines or anything like Tushian and China. He was buried alone. But he was buried alone within this mound with the rest of his ancestors, within a landscape of 500 tombs that rest within the sense of the ancestors of his forebears. Ellen.
You said armours in there. Nothing like horses or dogs, really.
Nothing like that. No dogs, horses, nothing like that. No. But his armour's in there. And we will have a look at some of those images. I'm very wary of time. So Lynn, if we go up for another 8 minutes and have a break, and then you'll have to leave us. You can't leave without your cream being rubbed on you. Dennis is going to do that. Moving on. If we look here, there he is being killed with an arrow from a Thracian archer going directly into his eye. There he is there.
Oh, you said the arrow happened first from the skull injury.
Yes, because basically what you can tell that the
I think they're after in time, not.
no, probably after in time. So it rips through the flesh where the eyelid is well. If it had been the other way round, there'd be some damage to that mark. So you've got the arrow first, that's taken out. Another battle, another conflict.
Killed by the arrow in his hand.
Pardon?
You just said killed.
He was killed, you said, by the arrow in his hand.
No, he wasn't killed. Sorry,
Injured.
he was injured. See, you asked me the question at the wrong time. You got me in. I'm glad to be corrected there.
Because you said killed, right?
No, he's got the arrow in his eye. That's taken out. It's surgically removed. Then a few years later, there's another battle. There he's got his wound there, and then in 336 he's assassinated. Okay, good. Sorry about the confusion there. You got me on the trot there. So this is a typical sort of Thracian archer. This is the campaign against the Thracians. It doesn't kill him. He survives. And when we go into history with this guy, he could have endured. He could have endured for another 10, 20, 30 years after his assassination. But that was never meant to be. What would have happened with Alexander the Great? We don't know. And there's another coin, a gold coin. So what? If you look at that coin itself, I'm going to get my little coin out, and you can all have a look at it. I know most of you have seen this coin before, but I will get it out for you. And hand this around. Where is it? Bingo, there it is. Okay, this coin itself is of Ptolemy V of Egypt. And that there, this one dates from about 220 years BC. So this coin itself is the same size as this, and you can get an idea of a thickness. It's just under the size of a £2 coin. These were standard. And this itself, you look at this coin and it hasn't moved in time. I call this a time capsule. Because you put it in your hand and exactly what you're looking at is exactly what they saw back there with no wear at all. So if you want to hand that around. So this is another representation of Philip II as Apollo. His coins would have continued to circulate. And there's one thing about this coin as well. Can I have it back a minute, Alan? I know you want to love it and feel it. There's one thing about this coin, is that this is almost Alexandra as Zeus, the god Zeus. But obviously this is different from his father's coins. But this is a bust of Alexander the Great on a coin of Ptolemy V of Egypt. The image of Alexander the Great was so recognised that you put his bust on your coins instead, not your own. There you go. And that is a diadem, a solid gold diadem, which would have been held as a band on his head. You can imagine. You can imagine how regal he would have looked. This a solid gold band on his head. This is what this is. So obviously the more ornate one is his stately crown. This is the crown they would have used for meeting the ambassadors. And again, they found this in there as well, like everything else. There is actually a museum. On site now. You can either see all the original stuff that they've excavated at the tomb, or some of the copies. But you can imagine that the Athenian Museum has got lots of this stuff as well. There was some worry a few years ago when the Greeks went bankrupt, that they were there was some talk of selling some of this treasure off to try and make some money. Lucky it didn't happen that way. And there's Pausanias. And this is a type of illustration. I've got lots of books from the late 1800s. And these books from the late 1800s, they've got these stylistic sort of woodcuts or sketches in these books. And you look at them and they all look like this. Loads of people around and sort of bits of Roman and Greek temples everywhere. But it's more likely that he was there within the theatre as he walked in through the gates, without sort of being within the sort of temple approach, sort of being visiting his people. He's a man of his people. So as he's talking to some Greek diplomats, Pausanias goes in there, stabs him, and runs away. Pausanias was one of the members of his personal bodyguard. It's good to have members of your bodyguard who are going to kill you, isn't it? So it's a bit very dramatic here. This is probably not how Philip II was dressed. But again, Pausanias may have been dressed very similar to this, with a slightly different, head guard on. But this sort of paints the type of scene that they want to portray as the death of Philip II. There it is. That's the design on the Macedonian flag today. And when you look at that, that's more or less an exact replica of what's on the chest, found within the tomb which held the remains of Philip II. The Greek government has been arguing with the northern Macedonians, you can't use this design because this is from Macedonia. And the Macedonians are saying, we're Macedonia as well. And the Greeks are saying, but this is our Macedonia. And the Greeks are saying, but this is our Macedonia. And anyway, long story short, the Greeks have let the Macedonians use this to sort of ease tensions. The Macedonians will never ever be strong enough to invade Greek Macedonia. That's not going to happen. But again, that sense of brotherhood between the northern modern-day Macedonia and the southern Macedonia, the types of people are very similar. Remember talking to Sandra on Tuesday when we did this. People in Greece can be very different from one area to the next. Very much in spirit, very much in the sense of understanding the landscape, and so on. But again, the sense of being within the midst of history can be found all around you. Again, this is one of the other entrances into the burials. One of the other burials within the Great Mound, very similar to the one of the likes of Philip II. But I'd like to ask those that know anything about their three orders will be able to tell me which order that is. Kathy, you're not allowed. What classical order of art is this out of the three? Does anyone know what I'm on about?
Iconic, Doric and stuff.
Corinthian or Doric or Ionic?
Ionic.
So Doric, Ionic or Corinthian? So which one is this? It's squared off. It's slightly inverted with the column.
Is it Doric?
We don't know. Tell
Okay, we will answer that question now. We've got to answer it now because Gillian will be phoning me for the next week. We'll come back to these ones here. There we go. It's a Doric order. That's Ionic and that's Corinthian. So the Doric order itself was the one that we see lots of the temples. For example, the Acropolis at the Parthenon at Athens itself. So we see most of it being under the Doric order, bits of it under the Ionic order, and the later order, Greek-Roman order, was the Corinthian order. When you look at Roman columns in Britain, any that have survived, they're always this canthus leaf design, the canthus leaf. So they're always shaped like this, the ones in our country. But the ones more over towards Greece are the Doric order, and then elsewhere you've got the Ionic and the Corinthian. So basically, if you want to go a bit further, you could say that this style here is named after the Ionic Islands of Greece itself, but that's another lecture altogether. But this is the first style, sort of 450s, 500 years BC, by probably about the 300 years BC, and this is just before the birth of our Jesus Christ. So you can see that it's almost as if the way you look at these earlier designs, the metatopes, or otherwise known as the frieze itself, is really ornate with different sort of carvings in it, as we see at the Parthenon, Oh no, we've got them in our country, sorry. And then we look a little bit more plainness, but the capital's a bit more ornate. Very, very ornate, slightly plain, but these are otherwise known as the three orders of classical Greece. So what I'd like to do, we've got a little bit more time. Gillian? Yeah? Gillian wants me to have she wants a full hour. I can see it breathing in your soul. Okay, so we'll do a couple of crowns. Look, Chris, it's not all about you, thanks. So the proportions are slightly wrong here. This is naturally to be held on your head, so that's about the scale. And because of the angle, this is actually the lengths of two standard shoe boxes. But again, solid gold. And it's got the lid on it with this as well, and the ashes are in there. The interesting thing about the ashes and the remains of Philip II, for once, they're all in there. They haven't been. Oh, what we'll do, we'll display everything separately. We'll put the remains of Philip II here. Hopefully people won't ask to see him anymore. We'll just check him in the back room. And we'll just show the gold in the chest. But his remains are still in there, which is great. I like that when everything's kept together. Chris?
Why were they separated then? Wouldn't it make it more logical for the one in the first antechamber to be somebody else, like his wife, and the second antechamber to be him?
His wife is never buried with him. But
If there's two boxes.
Within the other antechamber there is two bodies. No, start again. Within the other tomb that has been excavated, there are two bodies. There's the king and there's the wife. But Philip II had a number of wives. He had more than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He had a number of wives. You can imagine the argument there, Chris. The answer is the other box is full of all bits of oddments. I think a description, if I can remember, because I wasn't thinking where I was going to have this question. The other box, I think you've got bits of material and sort of bits of silk and other wonderful things like that. But yeah, I think you can imagine, Chris, right? 7 wives or more. Which one's going to be buried with him? I think there's going to be a bit of an argument. But the survivor of Henry VIII wasn't buried with him either. But anyway, but again, when we see how we look at his world, again, that is Philip II shown as a god with a lion, and we've got. Actually, the designs on these coins are really good because that is a really good representation of a lion or a lioness. Actually, that's a really good representation. You've got the phalanges and
No, it's banana.
It could be half a melon.
that looks like it's a banana.
It could be a melon.
We're going to leave that one out. If anyone argues that the Romans didn't have bananas, right? There's evidence, not the Romans, the Greeks. There's evidence that they did. Julian slipped over one the other week. And there again is Philip II. He's closer to the design on the, he's closer to the sort of reconstructions that we've seen. Again, a palm leaf. This is very similar to one that we've seen already. And we'll just look at one more image. Oh, that one. That's the last, that one there. There is Philip, and there. I think this is Kathy. Shut up. This is really subtle, because there's Philip in more or less an Apollo bust. We've already seen this one, I think, but we haven't seen the reverse of this. If we look at that there. Shit. Hello.
Toilet door's done.
Oh, thank you, lovely. Thank you, Roy. He's not right, he's gone, Ray. Did you hear? I'm not Roy. So, anyway, can we just quickly do this one, right? I'm not Roy. Oh, obviously, this. If you look at this, right, that's Philip on a chariot race at the Olympic Games, right? And if you look down there, he won gold. He actually won gold.
So is he a leading fighting machine?
He's a lean. Ellen, he's the man that you've always dreamt of.
He doesn't look bothered, he doesn't look like the other man.
No.
Hey, Matt, Julia, Ellen,
He looks like the rest of
it's
us.
not how you look, it's what you do with your body. Okay? Good. That's shut everyone up. It really has. Right, so what we can see, he's there in a chariot race. He's got the 2 horses. He's actually at Olympic Games. And he actually wins that race. And there is his gold award, his gold trophy. And I just, again, let's just zoom in on this trophy. It's just so modern, the way that those trophies are used today. And there it is. So what we're going to do, we're going to ask if there's any questions. Make sure one of you goes in to apologise to Roy. Should I call him something else like Dave? I'm not Dave. Right, any questions? No?
Hey, on your kite, was it like a bird or an eagle on the other side?
That's an eagle, yeah.
An eagle, what would that represent?
That's an eagle. I can tell you that quickly, if I may. It's a silver tetrachma, and our friend in the museum who identified this didn't tell me exactly what was on the back. But it's not dated to about 205 rather than 220 years BC. So there you go.
And it's very light. I thought it'd be a lot heavier than that.
But it's solid silver, yeah.
Plastic.
So let's have a break. What I'm going to do is, but for those interested in the Romans, it's the Arch of Galerius that was constructed around AD 600. And do you know what? When I'm doing my lectures, I love coming across things that I didn't know. Look at that beautiful arch. It's still there. It's still standing. It's a beautiful marble on there. It's a 3-tiered arch with 2 other tiers still standing. So Alan, look at the Arch of Galerius, very near our site at Vagina. And we just put that on there because I got one guy in my Tuesday class. He'll only come along if I mention the Romans once. So I do. And he pays me, and that's it. And he just falls asleep.
What happens if you mention them twice?
He stays for the lecture a bit longer. Yeah. So these are some of the remains in the antechamber, and you can actually get an idea. You've got looking at this as an archaeologist for the first time. What you're seeing is a lot of organic material, and you're seeing copper objects. You're seeing terracotta, and you're seeing gold as well. And I just wanted to just chuck this in there to basically say the antechamber had gold in it and all the rest of it. All these things were understood. The antechamber, the material wasn't as well preserved as the internal chamber. But again, these are great finds. These paint a great picture. And unfortunately, when Andronicus was working there in 1977, which is 40 odd years ago, the unfortunate thing is that we didn't have the same science then as we do now to analyse all this stuff. So sometimes it's a shame that these things weren't found a bit later, so we can actually analyse them better. But again, we got photographs, we got descriptions, and the archaeology is extremely well preserved, and they love this find. They really treat it well. Oh, go on, right? I'm gonna shut my mouth now. There's an expert who's worked on teeth. Tell us about this skull quickly, Ellen. Go on, give it to us. Obviously, the front incisors are gone, but other than that, is it a good set of gnashes?
He's got a lot of the front bits of the jaw at the back broken. You can see his sinus. See the right hand side, that bath shaped bit? No, that is right hand side.
Yeah.
Up a bit more, and left a bit, left a bit, up a bit more. That bit there is your sinus there.
Right.
So it's like when you've got an infection with wisdom teeth.
It goes into there.
It goes into your sinus.
Goes into there.
Or if you've got a cold and your sinus is blocked, that's why your teeth come through.
Goes into there. Is that? But Ellen, quick analysis. Is that?
Bone lost in the front.
That's obviously due to because this body has been cremated.
And the lower ones would be knocked out with trauma because the bony sockets are whole and full and tall on the lower.
But remember, this has been cremated, so we don't really know what's happened to
Well,
it
they
yet.
knocked them out because the bones.
Yeah.
The bone was found, so they must have just.
So knocked it out whilst they after
no,
cremation or yeah, it could be anything, couldn't it?
Yeah.
Uh,
On the top he's got bone loss, but on
Yeah.
the bottom he hasn't got bone loss. See the top teeth. the
You'd
roots
really
of
need
the
to handle this, wouldn't you, to have a good
Unless
look?
the tops were
Yeah.
broken off and it was trauma. But the teeth are actually still straight as they would have been in life. So there's no trauma enough to bend his top teeth. He's lost it.
Ellen,
Unless
forget
that was lost after.
forget about them. But overall, is that an okay set of gnashes for somebody
Yes,
coming up to their
amazing,
50th
yeah.
birthday? Yeah,
Yeah.
much better than mine. Thank you, Ellen. No, so this is the thing. When you've we did Joan.
He's even
Yeah.
got his 3 molars. He's amazing. Because some people don't.
Yeah, like me. We mentioned Joan of Arc, and we've got no remains of Joan of Arc other than the remains that Ellen's got under a bed. Isn't that true, Ellen?
Not under the bed.
Oh, but you're not denying it. Exactly.
It's of the pyre, not of the woman.
You can get an idea, with those 3 descriptions of Joan of Arc. It mentioned that Joan of Arc's remains had to be burnt a second time and a third time. So after the first time, it was like phalanges may have been gone, maybe the carpals and the tarsals, some of those bones, maybe 1 or 2 rib bones had been charred or whatever, but body was probably very much intact, so they burnt it again, and they burnt it again. This is proof that you can't always get rid of the body in one burning. And it's great that we've got this level of archaeology. We've got more of the eye socket and stuff that you can obviously see, and this is concentrating on the jawbone area. This itself, this beautiful diadem crown itself, he would have worn this, and it's beautiful, isn't it?
Is it solid gold?
It is actually solid gold. Yeah, it is.
Heavy.
It is, but it's not. It's very twisty. It's very light.
Is it?
Yeah. I do, and somebody, and you've got a nice little design of a knot there as well.
Yeah.
I want you to spend a lot more time on this one. I do have a little bit more of a description a bit further on, so we're going to get to that first. But this is preserved. If this had been left anywhere else, it'd been flattened. But because it'd been put in the ossuary box, the golden box, it was perfect when they lifted it out. You can imagine Andronicus lifting off the lid and thinking, I've come home. I've got everything I need. I've got all the evidence I need. So again, unfortunately, we're going to carry on a little bit more. The one thing that we also found was that some of his lower bones as well. So we've got the femur and the tibia fused almost together. It looks like we know that he had some kind of injury as well that reset the wrong way. We know that he had some injury, and this was actually found in the box as well. So it's almost as if all the bones that you need to identify Philip II were actually in the box. I didn't know, for example, that he had some kind of leg injury that seemed to set, but we can prove it here. We know that. There are mentions of it. And again, it's almost as if we'll forget about all the other bones, we're chucking all the bones that identify him as being Philip. So that's what we're seeing. I glanced over that briefly, and this is apparently the death mask of Philip II. This was found in there as well. This is where this would have been the damage to his right eye, and being a death mask, supposed to be a portrayal of him in death, there's not much sign of the damage to his eye there. And again, they wanted to portray this man as he should be portrayed. So the death mask is slightly obscured to the way he would have looked. Okay, if we feel that this is his death mask, then maybe the reconstruction's right, maybe all those later images. But this is put in there and is sealed with this poor individual who's assassinated after his death. So that's gone in there with him in 336 BC. So it gives you an idea. Keith, I'm working to it. 7 minutes, I think I could do it.
Oh, yeah.
There, look at that there. That's his wrought iron armour. Now, weirdly enough, there's been some decay to this, and it's probably more likely to be after the tomb was opened rather than before. In those conditions, in archaeology, what we do see, again, quickly, the peat bog example. If you put a body in a peat bog, the bones go, but the flesh and the organs and everything are really well preserved, but the bones dissolve. In normal land conditions, the skin and everything dissolves and you just got the bones, right? Here, the gold and the silver and the copper is really good state of preservation. But the iron doesn't seem to have fared well. But this is his armour, and we know, again, that this is his armour, his chest armour, because we've got descriptions of this. And the tomb has never been opened, ever. So nobody's gone in there and thought, right, we'll do a bit of a sketch. By the way, his armour is a bit of gold, yeah? Right, his face looked like this, yeah? Right, we'll close up the tomb. They didn't do that. It was, this was all in there. And these beautiful lions and lionesses of Macedonia, they had these on their shields. This was the embodiment of what Alexander the Great felt as well. There we go. There's his helmet, and there's the shield as well. It is a big shield. It's a wrought iron shield. Don't ask. I'm not going there. But this is a wrought iron shield, and there's his sword in the scabbard, and it's all there. This is all buried with this great man.
So his iron, his body armour was iron with gold trim, and then his shield was iron. I mean, could he move?
Kathy, we're not saying he actually wore any of this. It's just like hang on. With all due respect, Kathy, he's going into the afterlife. He can do whatever he likes. Thank you very much. We're not saying he actually held that thing. Flipping heck.
And you'd fall over.
And this is an image of them looking in the tomb, and you can actually see that this is actually breast downwards. And this is the back, but you can actually see that this is, they've had to do bits of reconstruction on this, so obviously over time this has fallen over in the tomb, whereas opposed, the flowers haven't. It's just like that weird contradiction. Archaeology is a weird contradiction. It's very, very rare that you get everything. There's always something amiss. There's always something strange. The gold is absolutely pristine, but the iron isn't. You know, those types of contrasts. You've got the, let's just, and again, as Apollo, and what I'm hoping to do now is that we've got these images. I thought I had the text about. We'll just read that. I'll give you these images a minute. There's our representation of Philip II again, and that is a medallion issued. And in memory of our Philip II. So obviously, if you look at that with the armour, this is where the gold comes down on the armour, and this is a representation after. I should have put these two together. I'm a bit of a remiss. So if we look back at the armour again, quickly, there we go. So if we got that in our eye, we got the gold there, and we bring it forward again. And this is what the representation on the medallion itself. So there we go. We've got some similarities, particularly these types of areas. So what I'd like to do now is sort of try to wind up a little bit now. So we'll keep that image in there. Lynn, I need your secret powers. Yeah, it's working. Thanks, Lynn.
Is there any reason why there are people facing left or right?
I'm just trying to think of a suitable reply.
There is a little bit. There is a little bit later. I just wanted to just a couple of minutes now. Is assassination, and what we do know about is assassination. We know that Pausanias of Orestis assassinated him. He was part of the bodyguard. People have gone in, and this. Why was he assassinated? Why did this happen? But there's no real understanding why. This was somebody who was meant to be very loyal to Philip II. But again, this individual stabbed Philip II in a public arena. Some say he may have been in the pay of the Persians. Some say that is the very reason why Alexander the Great invaded Persia in the first place. I found it. You know I found it. We'll actually end on this because this is where I want it to be. I found what I wanted to about our this here, the myrtle wreath. Okay, that's it. That's his technical name. The diadem, the myrtle wreath. After restoration, there are 80 leaves, 112 flowers, the main wreath, from which the small twigs sprouted consists of a narrow cylindrical rod whose two ends are flattened by twisted and twisted together. So we've actually got a better image than that, haven't we? So if I go the much better one, actually go back. Ah, there it is, much better one. There it is. Oh, that was the back we just saw then. So if we do that quickly, a little bit more detail. So we've got these 80 leaves. We've got these flowers. We've got all these flowers over here, different types of flowers. The internal diameter of the main tube, the tube itself, where this is set off. We can't see the tube on there, can you? No, you can't. The gold myrtle wreath is on display at the Thessalonica Museum, and it's said that this attire itself, more information about this, it is all solid gold, and these myrtle leaves and the blossoms of myrtle, and apparently this is cut from a thin sheet of gold, stamped and incised detail, wired onto the stems. And it wasn't just the only one found. They found a couple of others, and I think the other one we saw was another example of this wreath. Greeks wore wreaths for special events and received them as athletic prizes and honours. But this is one found in the tomb of Philip II. On that note, can't get up now. Are there any questions? Jim, quick.
Well, could Philip have been having an affair with his bodyguard's wife and he got a bit jealous?
It could have been. No, actually, that's not nonsense. There was some talk of that in one of the descriptions. Let's have one more question and we'll call it a day. Anyone? No? Have you all enjoyed this today? For those that want to know, Richard III next week. And thank you very much. I'll see you all next week. I'm just going to finish my tea. Thank you. Dennis, can you pull that out? Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
I managed to do well, mate. See you next week. Look after yourself.
We've got no room whatsoever. Never mind.
You'll be able to keep him on track. He gets his patterns wrong.
Thank you very much.
No, I don't know.
Oh, go on, darling. Can I mention, Chris has got to be one of the only men to ever do any washing up in this group. I'll get you a kidney next week.
I think so.
I don't know anyone any change, do I? No? Okay. Yes. What?
Yes.